Greetings, mortals, and welcome back to Mathemansy 101.
So today I am going to talk a bit about Pokemon Go. There's a couple of things that I want to touch on. I first want to touch on why the statistics for Pokemon Go are temporary and don't matter. And the second is going to be what those actually are, the things that don't matter. So the reason that the stats are irrelevant right now is because there's currently no competitive game. The defenders can't really win in any fights. The only way that a defender can win is if you're using really weak attackers, like really, really weak. Like you have to be very weak compared to the defender in order to have the defenders come out on top. And even then, it's only if the defenders are really tanky stuff like a Snorlax or a Vaporeon where you're going to run out of time. Because you're not going to run out of Pokemon. You have 6 Pokemon to defeat 1. There's a lot of reasons behind this. Part of it is that the attackers have the fundamental advantage, so one attacking Pokemon is stronger than the same Pokemon on defense. And that's kind of important. But in addition to that, you have 6 Pokemon. If they wipe out 5 of your Pokemon and you take out their first Pokemon, they lose prestige instead of gaining it for wiping out 5 people on your team. You have the ability to gang up on them. There's just a lot of things that make it so that defense is non-viable. The only way that you can defend is to not defend. If you take a gym and nobody attacks it, you defend it. If you take a gym and somebody attacks it, you don't defend it because they're going to take it. So anyway, so that's the basic gist of why it doesn't matter. Then the second thing that I'm going to get into is I'm about to talk about things like IVs and movesets, and I want to remind people that all of this stuff is very subject to change. Some of the moves in the game are very weak. They're very, very bad. They're so bad that they like some strong attacks do less damage than the weak attacks. So they need to change. They can't remain in the game like that because it defeats the entire purpose of the resource accumulation and then expenditure mechanic. So it has to be changed. So since some of the moves have to be fundamentally altered, they're very likely going to be tweaking a lot of them. A lot of the moves in the game are very likely going to change. Don't throw out Pokemon because of their movesets, okay? If you get a Gyarados and it has a weak moveset, keep it around. I'm going to talk a lot about how same type attack bonus is super critical. It's much more important than exploiting a weakness because exploiting a weakness gives you the same benefit that you get from stab, but stab is permanent. As long as that Pokemon exists, it will always have stab. That said, that's subject to change. In the previous Pokemon games, that's not how it worked. Same type attack bonus did not give you the same amount of advantage as exploiting a weakness. So don't expect it to remain like that because it's overpowered as heck and it makes it less interesting determining what skill set you should give your Pokemon. Okay? So anyway, that's that. So that stuff out of the way. I'm now going to talk about IVs because IVs are cool. IVs are probably one of the few things that you can say, okay, these are probably going to stick around. Do not use an application IV calculator that attaches to your Pokemon Go and does stuff. That's basically like doing a ROM hack on your Nintendo to, show your IVs in game, like just ripping it out of the raw data. Don't do that. Okay? It's obviously cheating, right? Is it cheating in a really massive way? No, it's not, right? Like, I don't hold it against people for wanting to make it a little easier, but Niantic has made it very clear that they do not want people to be ripping the game data out, right? They don't want applications, like third-party applications, doing anything with their game data. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. You can look this stuff up online. There's plenty of IV calculators that you can go to online to calculate your IVs. And Niantic doesn't like that either. But they have some strange design decisions. I'm just going to go ahead and say that the way that they interact with the sort of competitive community is a little strange. But at any rate, go ahead, use the online stuff. Do not use it as an app. So IVs are competitively important, and they matter more for weaker Pokemon. So if you're going to have, say, Magikarp duels or something fun like that, when if assuming that it eventually gets released, that you can do stuff like that, um, you know, pick a Magikarp that has really high IVs, because for those really weak Pokemon, you'll probably find that higher IVs are more important than higher levels. For stronger Pokemon, they are. It's still competitively meaningful, but you're looking at much more small differences. You're looking at like a 15% maybe difference in combat efficacy, something like that. I don't even know what it is for a Mewtwo, for instance. He has I think 700 in the other Pokemon games for his like total stat values. I don't know what that translates to in this game. But another thing that's actually important that I guess I should talk about that I haven't thought about until now is that generally speaking, the Pokemon that are strong in the video game, sorry, the this is also a video game, in like the original game are pretty much still strong here. The ones that have really high stat value totals are they basically just ripped those totals and did a little bit of conversion to them and plucked them in. That said, sweepers are really bad. Like an Alakazam is nowhere near as good as he was in the base game because the speed stat doesn't exist anymore, and his physical defense stat was really low, if I recall correctly, and his HP was really low. So sweeper Pokemon tend to be weaker than they were in the original game, and the sort of beefier Pokemon tend to be stronger. So just to give you an idea, but you can always look up on like a Pokemon database what their actual stats are. But like a Dragonite is as powerful as you would expect a Dragonite to be, for instance. An Onyx is just as terrible as you remember. That 40 attack power translated into really low stats in this one. So, wow, yeah, the Onyx, poor Onyx. So anyway, all that being said, I'm going to talk about the move sets. I have not been pleased with the analysis of move sets. I don't think that anyone has really done a very good analysis of move sets and how they work. They haven't done a very good DPS analysis. This is the DPS analysis that works. Okay, I'm going to give you guys the formula, and you guys can just use it. It is. I don't know why nobody is using this, because this is really just obviously the way that it works. So the way that the game works is that you have resources that you're accumulating with your quick attacks, and then you're expending that resource energy with your heavy attacks. Very simple. So the way that you calculate the total DPS of your rotation, because it's important to recognize your quick attack does not have a DPS stat on its own. Okay? It does, but only if you're only using that, because your quick attack is also generating energy. Okay? And energy has variable DPS. Okay? Each point of energy is worth a different amount of DPS depending on what your strong attack is. So if you have, say, Ember that does, I don't remember how much DPS it does 10 damage per hit, but in addition to that, it also generates 7 energy per hit. So how much DPS does Ember do? Well, it depends. What is your secondary attack? Because that 7 energy that you're generating is used by the second attack for better or worse effects. So, that being said, like with the worst being that the secondary attack is terrible, so bad that it's worse than Ember to just spam Ember, at which point Ember does exactly 10 DPS, because you're never using any of the energy that it generates. So, the way that you calculate your DPS is you just say, okay, how much energy am I generating? And so how many weak attacks does it take to generate a strong attack? Okay? Very simple. So in the case of Ember, for a Flareon, or anything else that has this pairing. So if you have a Flamethrower, actually let's not do Flamethrower because it's not the highest damage one. Let's use Fire Blast. So assuming that you have Fire Blast, it takes 15 Embers to generate one Fire Blast. Okay? So what you do is you take your Ember and it does 10 damage. So you multiply that by the number of weak attacks that you're doing, right? So you're doing 15 weak attacks. So 15 Embers is 10 damage each. So 150 damage total. Okay? Then you add the damage of your strong attack. Okay? In this case, we're using Fire Blast. So Fire Blast is a very big, heavy attack. It does 100 damage. Okay? So now you're looking at 250 damage. That's the total damage that you've dealt in the window of generating one strong attack. You then divide that whole thing by the amount of time it takes for that rotation to occur. Now, all of this information you can get off of like just Googling like Pokemon stats. It's like there's a Pokemon database site and stuff like that that you can find all of these statistics for. But in this case, it takes 19.85 seconds to do that full rotation. Okay? So you divide the whole thing by that, and you find that you do 12.59 DPS total with the full rotation. So over the course of that time, over the course of not quite 20 seconds, you are dealing 12.59 damage per second of that rotation. The important thing to remember is that damage is heavily bursty. Now, as anyone who, you know, I guess I haven't told you how long an Ember is, but an Ember is almost exactly 1 second long. So Ember does almost exactly 10 DPS. It's slightly less because it has 1.05 second attack rate. So slightly less, but it's about 10 DPS. So somewhere around 25% of the damage of that entire rotation was being done just by Fire Blast. So at the very end of the rotation, there's this massive burst of damage that goes out. Okay? So that's important to recognize. And because of that, there's a lot of implications there. Let's say that you're using Flamethrower instead. Flamethrower requires between 7 and 8 embers to generate one. The reason that it's variable is because since it only requires 50 energy, you can stockpile extra. So when you do the first 8 embers, you get up to 56 energy. Then you add in, then the next rotation, you only need to do 7 embers from then on, because 49 and then plus the 6 that you started with, you're over 50 again. So it's somewhat variable. But it's important to recognize that while you're doing a little tiny bit under 10 DPS with the Ember, you then get this burst, and the Flamethrower does, that rotation does about 11.94 DPS in one rotation. So for over the course of that duration, but that's an 11-second duration. So if you have the ability to burst down a Pokemon quickly, you might have more value in a lower DPS rotation that's shorter because it allows you to burst in the damage that you need to finish the thing off. That said, if you're dealing with a relatively weak thing that you can kill without using your special attack, but then the next enemy is really, really potent, what you can do is you can stockpile energy and then burst your special attack the second the next Pokemon appears. If you do that, which is very effective against, for instance, let's say that you're fighting against something that has attacks that you are weak against, in addition to it itself being weak against your attacks, you're both super effective against each other. You want to burst out damage as quickly as possible. And something like Fire Blast has the advantage there because you can burst out a huge amount of damage in the opening phase of that second fight. So there is some degree of variability there where the utility for a given fight will necessitate using one or the other. That said, generally speaking, for most fights, just the raw DPS is enough to look at. And in most cases, you'll probably find that they're somewhat similar. I say that, but no, that's true for Flareon. Most of Flareon's attacks are about the same. Heat Wave is terrible, but both Flamethrower and Fire Blast do about the same damage. I wouldn't expect that to hold true for everything else. But so while it's good to be able to compute, how much damage is this Pokemon going to do? By the way, you can then multiply the DPS value of its moveset by the total CP of the Pokemon to get an overall estimate of how strong the Pokemon is overall. Because the CP value on its own doesn't tell you that much because you don't know how much DPS it does base with its moves. But if you combine it with the DPS factor, that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. The only thing that it doesn't tell you is the durability versus attack power ratio, which can matter if you're going up against a Snorlax, for instance, because Snorlax is beefy. Shit, I lost track of where I was going. Oh, right. So basically, the key though is that, as I said before, all this stuff is subject to change. They're going to be changing the movesets. So while it's good to know what stuff you have right now, don't expect your moves to stay the same in a month or 2 months or a year from now. Don't expect that the values are going to stay the same. And as a result, if you have a Gyarados who's got some craptacular moveset and you're just going, no, all of those candies put to waste, don't rage and transfer the Gyarados. Keep the Gyarados, because next month it might be God tier. You just don't know. Okay? So don't make any rash decisions until things have started settling down and you actually have sort of like a competitive scene. You actually have this stuff working properly. The move sets are balanced, or Niantic has made it clear that they don't intend to balance the move sets. One of those two things. Just keep around anything that could potentially be viable in the future. So that's going to be it for this video, you guys. I hope you have a good time playing this game. Remember, don't take it too seriously. Just, have a good time with it. Do all the math you want. Math is beautiful. Do it all. I'm not telling you not to do the math. Just when you do the math and you find out, damn, my wife got Fire Blast and I just got Flamethrower, so it has 3% less damage on its attack cycle. Not that happened to me. I'm not saying that we both had identical 93rd percentile EVs that then turned into Flareons and hers was better. I'm not saying that. Maybe. Anyway, just have a good time with it. Enjoy yourselves. And, take everything that the experts say with a grain of salt. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you again next time.